So moving on to the next institution, which is religion. Now, religion, the purpose of religion that we discussed last time was that religion provides spiritual guidance, perhaps the meaning of life and death, spirituality, the meaning of life and death to its followers, help perhaps guide them in understanding the purpose of life. So some things like that. So that is the purpose of religion for its followers. Now, immediately, we're going to discuss this word here, religiosity, because you'll see it very, very often when you do MCAT papers. So religiosity is basically just the degree of religiousness. So if a person is very religious, then they are high in religiosity. If a person is not so religious, then they are low in religiosity. Now, there are lots of different types of religious organizations. So let me change the pen color for that. Now, hold on. Okay, so the first one is your dominant religion. So in Thailand would be Buddhist. In other countries, maybe Catholicism. Okay, so the main religion or the dominant religion has a very big purpose because they tend to work very closely with the government. They tend to be the force that they have a lot of power over their followers. So if the government needs something that a lot of people tend to disagree with the government, then the government would seek help from the dominant religion. So they have a kind of give and take relationship with the government. And whatever the government asks the religious organization and the religious leaders to ask of its followers to do, they tend to do it. But then also the religious organization gets something from the government as well in case they need some kind of help or something like that. Any favors from the government, they tend to get it. And there are people who don't like this. There are people who don't like the fact that there's a lot of government involvement in the main or dominant religion, because there are people who are very religious and who don't like the involvement of other people who are in it for not the religion itself, but to gain favors. So that leads to people branching out from the dominant religion and forming their own sects. So these are people who split from the dominant religion because they are unhappy with the teachings of the dominant religion because it seems very watered down. It seems like there's a lot of orders or demands from the government as well, which kind of interferes with the religion, with the purity of the religion. So there are a lot of people who are super, super orthodox, people who want the religion in its purest sense. And those are people who tend to split off from the main religion. Now, of course, there isn't just one sect. There are people who split off from the dominant religion, and there are people who don't agree with each other. So it's not like there is like one big set. There's a dominant religion and there's one big set. No, there are so many small, tiny sects that have broken away from the dominant religion. So there are essentially, if it's Buddhism, then there are many different Buddhist sects that are around nowadays. And then there are cults. So cults are normally led by a charismatic leader. And cults have a very bad reputation. Normally, it's people, these leaders are people who might have some psychological problems. There are people who have narcissistic personality disorder. There are people who are schizophrenic. There are people who think that God is talking to them, so they have to lead all of these other people into whatever form the cult is. So there have been a lot of different types of cult in the past, such a cult end of the world or end of the world cult, mass suicide cult, a lot of different types of cult until now. Recently, just a few I think a week or 2 weeks, there was in the newspapers as well that there's a cult here where people were asked to eat their feces or to extend life or something along those lines. So there is lots and lots of different types of cults that exist. And of course, they call themselves religion rather than a cult to try to get away with it and to get a lot of benefits out of claiming themselves to be religion. However, nowadays, because cult have such a bad reputation, and normally in the past, people in cult used to live together in what we call as communes. Nowadays, cults are not that obvious. So there aren't that many communes anymore. So there are more people who come for meetings and discussions and things like that and go back and live their own lives, go back and live in their own homes, so that it's very difficult to recognize what is a cult and what is not a cult anymore. What is like kind of like a self-help group, or is it a cult? So it can be very difficult to distinguish nowadays whether something is a cult or not, whether you are a part of a cult or not. So normally people who join cults are people who are very despondent, people who are almost, they feel a very unfulfilled, very vulnerable people. And that is how it's easy to take advantage of people who are vulnerable. And a lot of people end up joining cults without realizing that they're joining cults. So those are a few keywords, a few religious organizations. Now, religious classification. Hold on, I'm gonna need a little bit more space. So I will just add religious classifications here. I'll draw a line here. So religion can be classified based on the amount of gods that a religion worships, or deity, or whatever it is that they worship. So I'll write it here, religious classification. So religion can be classified as polytheistic if there are, well, the word poly means multiple. So if there are multiple gods that, or multiple deities or divinity that a religion is worshiping, then we call that as a polytheistic or polytheism, such as ancient Greek, Romans, those would be classified as polytheistic religion. There are also monotheistic religions, which only follow one deity or one god. So that's where the word mono, I can give you a hint. So such as monotheistic religion would be something like Judaism, or Islam would be a monotheistic religion. And then there is atheism, whereby there is no deity or no divinities that are worshipped. And then there is animism, where religions that worship plants or animals, something along those lines, would be classified as animism. And then there is totemism, where you worship, rather than worshiping a deity, you worship connections between human beings, spiritual connections, and things like that. These are often first world country religion. Now, you have to remember that some religions don't fall under just one classification. There is an example like Hinduism, whereby it is polytheistic and animistic as well. So Hinduism follows multiple deities and also worship certain animals as well. Now, we have to touch upon the idea that religion nowadays have modernized a lot. Some religions have modernized a lot. If they don't modernize, then like I mentioned that, they might end up not having a function and becoming obsolete. So I just moved that down a little. I have to add that religion has succumbed, most religions have succumbed to modernization. Modernization would imply like the adoption of technology. If religions don't modernize, suppose during COVID, when everybody was under lockdown, and if there were some religion or religious organizations that insisted people come to the place of worship to pray, then that would be pretty bad, because they would have no followers go out of their houses to pray, and they would lose followers very quickly. So they had to adopt technology. They had to zoom in their religious prayers and things like that. And that is how they have continued to exist. So they really, really had to modernize during such times. Now, there is also secularism that has arisen a lot during the last few years. Now, let me explain to you, there are different types of secularism that basically shows different degrees in which people believe in religion. There is institutional secularism, whereby people don't go to the place of worship, but it's not that they don't believe in God, they just don't have the time to go to the place of worship, and they strongly believe that just because they don't go to the place of worship doesn't mean they're not religious, or doesn't mean that they don't love their deity or their God or something like that. So this would be classified as institutional secularism. They might just stay home and pray at home rather than commute to the place of worship. There are also people that can be classified as practical secularists, whereby these people might not succumb to all the practices or all the religious teachings of a religious organization, because they might feel like some of them doesn't fit them, or they just don't connect with certain practices, so they pick and choose what practice makes sense to them, and they only do that. Such as, for example, if there are certain religions that might require a person to pray 10 times a day, but there are people that don't have the time to pray 10 times a day, so they might just adapt to their lifestyle. So they're adapting religion to fit with their lifestyle rather than changing their lifestyle to fit with their religion. So instead of praying 10 times a day, these people might end up just praying twice a day. And then there are people who are ideologically secularist. So these are the people that just completely feel like the religious teachings isn't for them, basically doesn't make sense for them. So they end up not believing so much in religious teachings and might lean more towards science and things like that instead. There is also an idea called shopping for religion. Shopping for religion implies that you pick and choose what makes sense for you from each religion. So for example, you might be a secular Jew. So you might not actually be a practicing Jew, but then you are Jew because you are Jewish because perhaps your parents are Jewish or something like that. But then you yourself might not be that religious. You yourself might actually be quite secular. And then you pick and choose what to follow from other religions, such as if you were Jewish, but then you kind of like the idea of meditation from Buddhism, so you adopt that and you meditate. And then you kind of like the idea of Songkran, so you play Songkran, you indulge in Songkran holiday. And you also like Christmas, so you might also engage in the Christmas festivities, even though it has nothing to do with your religion. So this is what shopping for religion implies. Okay, that is the end of religion. Okay, now we're going to continue the rest, the government and economy and the rest in the next class.